I'm using a 30-ounce skinny straight tumbler from New England Glitter. I went ahead and I found this awesome foil table cover from Dollar General for $3. When I saw it, I absolutely knew I wanted to try using it on a tumbler. So I went ahead and I cut a large square rectangle piece of this foil out, and I'm going to go ahead and scrumple it up in my hands a few times just to add a lot of texture to it as well. This way it also will help hide any blemishes or wrinkles that are already in that tablecloth to begin with. Once I went ahead and I found and liked the way that I liked how scrumpled it was, I went ahead and I used 5 milliliters of epoxy to apply this foil to the tumbler. Now, I did go ahead the first time and use Mod Podge. However, the Mod Podge would not dry underneath it, and I'm assuming because this is not a breathable material, the Mod Podge didn't have air to dry. So I went ahead and I went in with epoxy. I put very little on the tumbler, just enough to give it enough stickiness for the foil to adhere to, and this actually seemed to work out really well for me. So once I went ahead and I applied that the epoxy over my tumbler nice and smooth, I took the foil and I started just to wrap around the tumbler, working my way around, making sure I had no wrinkles or air bubbles as I went ahead and rolled it. Take your time with this. Make sure you have all your wrinkles and bubbles out. Having that texture in that foil helps hide any creases that was in that tablecloth. You don't have to add that extra texture to it. You can definitely leave it as it was. However, I really liked that texture to it. It gave the cup a lot of dimension and depth. So I went ahead and did it with the texturing and crinkling of it. Once I went ahead and got it around the tumbler, I just made sure that all the wrinkles and bubbles were completely out of this before it started to cure. You want to make sure you have this nice and flush against that tumbler without any wrinkles or bubbles. I wasn't too worried about the excess overhang on the top and the bottom, but I did go ahead and cut a little bit off of the bottom so I can apply the circle piece to the bottom of my tumbler, as that's going to be part of the peekaboo as well. So I went ahead and I just made sure that after I cut a little bit off, I just made sure it was still adhered to the bottom rim of the tumbler. Then I went ahead and placed my circle piece on, pressing that against the tumbler, working out any wrinkles, bumps, lumps, bubbles, or anything like that that could cause any imperfections with this tumbler. Once this tumbler dries, I will go ahead and cut off the excess on the top and the bottom, but right now I'm just leaving it as it is, as I don't want that foil to shift or anything like that. So once I am all set placing all of my foil on, I'm going to go ahead and let this sit on the turner for 4 to 6 hours before I go ahead and move to the next step. It looks so pretty already. I'm so excited to see this underneath epoxy. Alright, so I went ahead and cut off the excess off the base, off the top and the bottom rim. I'm going in with 15 milliliters of epoxy. I use artisan resin from DIY Culture Epoxy. I'm just putting this epoxy on there pretty easily, a nice decent sized coat. And then once I'm done applying this on here, I will go ahead and let this spin for another 4 hours before I go ahead and I apply a second coat of epoxy. I just want to make sure that this foil is really covered well underneath that epoxy. Make sure you get your bottom of your tumbler really well. I wanted to make sure that I had epoxy going around that rim, making sure that I had the sides that joined the bottom really secured onto there as well, so no epoxy seep through underneath the foil as well. So like I said, make sure you just take your time. This is a really easy material to work with. You don't really need much epoxy, but you can see that depth and that crinkle underneath that layer of epoxy. It is really pretty. I actually really like that texture to it, and I cannot wait to see how this turns out once we add our peekaboo to it. Alright, so this tumbler has been spinning and drying for 12 to 18 hours. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut out my stencil. I am using the Heartthrob pattern off of Etsy. It is a pretty popular pattern right now. I went ahead and I cut this out on my stencil, out of my stencil vinyl with my Cricut. Now, I've never done a full complete wrap like this before on a tumbler, so this is completely new to me. However, it took me a few seconds to realize and figure out how exactly I wanted to do this. I started to weed it out, but then I'm like, why would you weed it out? Place it on the tumbler and then weed it out. So I'm going ahead and I'm removing that backing sheet off of my 651, or not my 651, my stencil vinyl. I can't even talk today. My blue stencil Oracle vinyl. I did have a few pieces that kind of came off, so I was pushing them back into place. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim any excess around that I don't need, because we want this to be as flush as possible to the design with no extra overhang, as we want this design to line up perfectly once we put it on the tumbler. I am leaving a slight overhang of the clear transfer tape on top because we're going to be applying this with the hinge method. So once I went ahead and I cut that to the size that I needed it to and made sure that there was no excess overhang, we're going to go ahead and start to apply this to the tumbler. Now, like I said, I've never done one of these fully wraps before, so make sure you take your time. Practice makes perfect, and honestly, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So I'm taking my tumbler and I'm going to lay down a piece of painter's tape just to give me a solid straight line, to give me something to work off of when I start to lay down that stencil vinyl. So once I put that on there, I will go ahead and apply this to the hinge method using that line as a guide to make sure that that stencil vinyl is 100% straight. When you're doing these type of wraps, you want to make sure that you're getting it on as straight as possible, so this way it's not going on at an angle or you have any issues with your pattern lining up. Now, this pattern is really easy. It's not very versatile, but for the first time I did this, it didn't fully line up 100%, but I was able to actually fix it super easily, and you never would have noticed that it was not 100% aligned. It did go on at a little bit of an angle. I was having a hard time with the tumbler, kept rolling around. So it was just giving me, you know, a little bit of a trouble, but what's crafting without having any issues, especially when you're doing a pre-recorded tutorial. So like I said, everybody has these oopsies, or they struggle with certain things. It's not a big deal. Like I said, the tumbler still came out perfect once we had it wrapped. So we're just going to go ahead and start to place this vinyl stencil on our tumbler. Once we get it realigned onto there perfectly straight, I'm going to go ahead and start slowly removing the backing sheet while rolling the tumbler and using my hands to make sure that it's nice and smoothed out without any wrinkles or lumps or bumps. And again, you want to make sure you're careful with pulling up that vinyl, that stencil vinyl, because you'll pull up the design. Once it's down, it's pretty much down. There's a lot of tiny intricate pieces in with this stencil pattern that I chose. So like once you have it down, it's going to be hard to pull it back up and replace it, because all of those pieces are going to stick. So once I got to the back side, I made sure I removed that painter's tape, so this way I could go ahead and match it up to the other side. However, this is when I realized that it did go on at a slant angle, so the seams didn't match up exactly in the back. But like I said, it was seriously a super easy fix. All I had to do was take parts of the heart and just adjust them and move them down a little bit, and then they were good to go. It was completely seamless. You couldn't even tell that it didn't line up. So like I said, for this being my first actual wrap, I was pretty proud of myself that it went pretty smoothly, other than that small minor hiccup. But like I said, it wasn't that hard to fix, and I was really happy with the way that it came out. So now I'm just going to remove that transfer tape, peeling back and keeping the transfer tape as close to the tumbler as possible so I don't pull up any of the design. or cause any air bubbles in that stencil vinyl that is now on the tumbler. And I do apologize if you can hear any of the background noises of my furnace or my bunnies playing. I normally don't do voiceovers. I normally do my tutorials with me talking throughout them, but I feel like they get really, really long when you do it that way versus just making them and then doing a voiceover. So again, I do apologize if you can hear any weird noises in the background. Once we get that the vinyl stencil on and the transfer tape off, I'm going to go ahead and start weeding out the stencil. I had to go ahead and keep referencing back to the actual design on Etsy just to see what pieces were staying and what pieces were going. Once I kind of got going, it was smooth sailing from there. I didn't have any issues with removing anything. And this part for me, always with a peekaboo, this is my favorite part. Adding decals and stuff to your tumblers are always my favorite. A lot of people say that, you know, the peekaboo part or the vinyl part to adding to their tumblers is their least favorite part. But to me, that is the most soothing and the most exciting part for me, because your whole entire design is actually starting to come together. And I find this really therapeutic for me. Like, it's calming. I absolutely love weeding out things. There's been times where I just cut out random mandala decals, and I'll sit there for hours and just weed them out. I find it soothing. But I get it. For some people, it could be stressful and cause anxiety. But for me, I absolutely love this. So once my stencil vinyl was on, you can see where all of the design's going to be, where the negative space is, what's going to be colored and what's not. I went ahead and I didn't show this part as it was snowing here. I went ahead and I sprayed this 3 times with Rust-Oleum 2 times white matte spray paint. I let it dry for an hour or so, and then I went right back in immediately and started weeding off the vinyl to start showing the design. You don't want to wait too long to weed, as there's been issues where the vinyl is hard to pull off and sometimes it leaves a sticky residue. However, I know that's more so with using actual like 651 vinyl. I'm using Stencil vinyl and I've never had that issue, but I didn't really want to find out, so I made sure I went ahead and I removed this vinyl as soon as I could when that paint was dried. As you can see here in sections of me weeding out the design, you can see how beautiful this is starting to look. I was so excited when I saw this coming together. Just the rainbow color, the foil, the texture underneath, it was just amazing and beautiful. I couldn't decide what I wanted to put on this tumbler, as I loved it as it is. You could totally add anything you want to this. You could add your name, you could add a decal, you could leave it as is. It's totally up to you. However, I was really loving this tumbler as it is. Simple and easy. It really was beautiful the way that it was, and I didn't want to take away from the texture of the foil underneath. So I went ahead and I actually left this as is, and you'll see in the next clip what I did with it. I forgot to record the last step, which was applying my epoxy, but it's pretty much all the same. If you have any questions about applying epoxy, I can definitely add a tutorial on how to epoxy tumblers. I do apologize for that as well, guys. But like I said, I didn't add anything else to it. So in the next clip, you will see the finished product. I did go ahead and I added some snow caps mica into my epoxy from Glitter Chimp, just to give it that extra pop of sparkle, especially on the white parts of that tumbler. And I did leave it as is. So I hope you guys really loved this tutorial. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And here is the final look of